The allure of treasure hunts never fails to ensnare the masses, casting a bewitching spell upon their souls. For who can resist the tantalizing prospect of unearthing a clandestine trove, capable of irrevocably altering one's destiny? The truth behind such quests proves far grimmer, stripping away the veneer of fairy tales and revealing a stark reality steeped in tragedy. Sometimes, though, the pursuit of opulence morphs into a grim dance with death, where the treasure you seek takes more than it gives. Forrest Fenn was a man who always fancied himself as something of a real-life Indiana Jones. Someone who could hold down a day job as a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, all while moonlighting as an amateur archaeologist in his spare time. And it was these extracurricular activities that helped him amass a number of valuable artifacts over the years. Artifacts which he eventually put up for display in his own gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico starting in 1973. Of course, while at first that was a relatively small operation, one designed to give him an avenue with which to show what he had collected, by the time the late 80s rolled around, Fenn Galleries and its contents had grown so large it was grossing approximately $6 million in revenue. But then how could it not make money when it included such items as a mummified falcon from King Tutankhamun's tomb, or a peace pipe which once belonged to the famed Native American leader Sitting Bull? And that's exactly why at that point it wasn't uncommon to see celebrities like Jackie Onassis, Steven Spielberg, or Robert Redford stopping by for a tour. Sadly though, any joy Forrest got from showing such people around and telling them about the items he'd accumulated over the years was dampened when, in 1988, he was diagnosed with kidney cancer. Now facing death, the former fighter pilot was forced to begin pondering what he wanted his legacy to be, and that period of introspection would ultimately result in him coming up with the idea of the Fenn Treasure. What was that? Well, it was a plan to take some of his most valuable artifacts, namely a number of gold coins, gold nuggets, pre-Columbian gold figures, emeralds, and gold diamonds, and hide them inside a 10 by 10 inch or 25 by 25 centimeter 12th century Romanesque lockbox. Then, once he'd made sure those items were safely locked up, he wanted to haul them out to an undisclosed location in the Rocky Mountains and leave them by his side as he died alone in peace. After that, the hope was that some random mountain climber would one day come across his body, as well as the treasure which lay next to him. But what Forrest hadn't counted on was the fact that he would actually beat cancer, and because of that, his plan to die alone in the mountains was halted. Instead, the Fenn Treasure would now sit untouched in a vault inside his home all the way up until 2010, the very year he self-published his autobiography, The Thrill of the Chase, a memoir. That turned out to be the moment that changed everything because amongst the collection of short tales about his life which were included in the book, Forrest also described the treasure chest he'd filled during the period he feared he was going to die. But according to him, it was no longer in his vault. No, it was hidden in the mountains somewhere north of Santa Fe. It could be found if the clues hidden within his autobiography were followed closely. What he'd essentially published was an elaborate treasure map, and obviously it quickly caught the attention of amateur sleuths and archaeologists all over the country, as everyone wanted to be the one to find the riches hidden within. In fact, it would cause so much excitement, at one point Forrest claimed he was receiving upwards of 100 emails a day from hunters looking for further clues as to where the bounty could be located. Of course, to each of these, his response was always the same. All of the information you need is right there in the book. Some parts of his memoir were more crucial than others when it came to unlocking the mystery. One poem found in the chapter named Gold and More was deemed to be the key to the entire thing by many. That was because, amongst its 24 stanzas, Forrest Fenn had deliberately placed 9 clues which, if deciphered, would supposedly lead those seeking the treasure right to it. The clues were vague and cryptic, but it wasn't like they were entirely unsolvable. Take one of the first, for example. Quote, Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Most took this as to mean their search should start at one of the many hot springs found within the Rocky Mountain range. Of course, there were others who disagreed with that and felt like what they should be looking for was the point where warm water turned into cold water within a river, specifically a point where trout could be found. The reason for the latter belief was that the man behind the entire hunt was known to be an avid fisherman and someone who often fished for trout in the area. But even that wasn't the last theory. No, there were countless others which popped up on online forums and Reddit pages devoted to solving the mystery over the next few years, with each poster believing they were the one who had finally put it all together. Of course, it's easy to sit behind a computer screen and say you've figured out where the mystery treasure is, but it's another thing entirely to put your money where your mouth is and venture into the mountains themselves to test that theory. And that's where the story begins to take a far deadlier turn. With so many people becoming convinced they knew exactly what spot to go to in order to find the gold and jewels hidden within that locked chest, many of them began setting off into the wilderness in search of it. The only problem with that, though, was that the vast majority of these sleuths were not fully prepared of the often harsh conditions of mountain climbing, and as a result, they didn't take the proper safety precautions ahead of time. This was made all the worse by the lack of coordination between different hunters as, fearing others were going to steal their conclusions and use them to find the gold before they could, many kept any plans they had to themselves. So if they came across any problems while out in the Rockies, it would be very hard for anyone to locate them. And that's exactly what led to the first casualty of the hunt occurring in July of 2016, when a 54-year-old divorced grandfather named Randy Bilyeu, who had been reported missing 7 months prior, was found dead by workers walking along the Rio Grande. Of course, while no official cause of death could be determined by a subsequent autopsy, the fact that Randy's family and friends were well aware that he was out there seeking the Fenn treasure made it easy for them to put the blame on Forrest himself. In fact, the now deceased man's ex-wife even made a public statement expressing her belief that the whole thing was a hoax, and that there never had been any riches waiting out there in the mountains at all. While Forrest was apologetic over what had happened to Randy in the days following, he disputed this claim vigorously and continued to maintain the treasure was indeed real. He now pleaded with people who wanted to go searching for it to plan things out properly ahead of time lest they end up getting hurt or even worse. Unfortunately, though, not everyone took that advice, as just 1 year later on June 9, 2017, a second body would be found, this time in Yellowstone National Park. That body was soon identified as 53-year-old Jeff Murphy, a man from Batavia, Illinois, who had also been known to have an interest in finding the Fenn treasure. But while in the case of the prior victim, no cause of death could officially be determined, in this situation it was very clear what had killed Jeff, as, while trying to traverse a particularly dangerous part of the park, he'd slipped and fallen down a 500-foot slope. That likely meant he died quickly, and so probably didn't suffer, but that didn't do much to make his family feel any better, particularly his wife, who once again placed the blame squarely on Forrest Fenn and his irresponsible scavenger hunt. It wasn't just the nearest and dearest of the dead who were now pointing fingers at the former fighter pilot. No, the police were also getting in contact with him too, but it was not with the intention of pursuing any criminal charges against him, as he technically hadn't done anything wrong. Rather, it was to get him to publicly call off the search so that more people wouldn't get hurt in the future. Remaining convinced the whole thing was safe if people just took the correct precautions, though, Forrest refused to do that. His stance would soften somewhat just 1 month later, as it was then a third body was found 5 to 7 miles downstream of the Taos Junction Bridge, with this one belonging to Paris Wallace, a pastor from Grand Junction, Colorado. Unsurprisingly, like the first two victims, Wallace was also out there seeking the gold that he believed was hidden just waiting to be found. As his loved ones later described it, in fact, he'd informed them he was going to search an area 50 miles north of Santa Fe, but that he would return in time for a planned family gathering on June 14th. When he didn't show up, however, panic began to arise and the authorities were called. That was what led to his car first being found parked near the Taos Junction Bridge just 5 days later on June 19th, and then his body itself discovered soon after that. The death toll was beginning to pile up now, and so finally recognizing his role in the whole thing, Forrest Fenn made a further public statement soon after. His statement would not be to inform people the search had been called off and that the treasure had been taken back for himself. No, instead it would be an additional plea for proper safety measures to be taken. As he put it while being interviewed by CBS News reporter Barry Peterson, quote, "I made it hard to find deliberately. If it was easy, anyone could do it. Please be cautious and don't take risks." In order to help minimize those risks going forward, he then added further clues which he felt might keep people away from particularly dangerous areas when he stated, quote, "The treasure chest is not underwater, nor is it near the Rio Grande River. It is not necessary to move large rocks or climb up or down a steep precipice, and it is not under a man-made object." Still though, even with these added clues and pleas to stay away from dangerous areas, further casualties would come out of the search for the hidden treasure. The next victim would be discovered a mere 2 weeks later on July 28th, as it was then that the body of 31-year-old Eric Ashby, a noted puzzle enthusiast who'd moved to Colorado the year prior specifically to find the missing bounty, was discovered floating in the Arkansas River. But this one almost ended up being much worse because the river Eric was found in was the same one he'd been traveling down in a raft with a group of other treasure hunters the month before. That was until it overturned and they were pulled underwater, with it nearly resulting in a mass tragedy. In the end, though, the men and women there would all be able to get themselves to shore, all except Eric Ashby. He was the only one who never resurfaced, and to make matters worse, it appears no one there thought to report the incident to the authorities at the time. No, it was left to a third party to contact the police and tell them what had happened instead. Why wouldn't those directly involved report the incident? Well, that's a matter of pure speculation, but it isn't unreasonable to think at this point people were so desperate to find the Fenn treasure, they didn't want anyone coming in and shutting the whole thing down following another death. Seriously, so manic and obsessive had some become about finding what was out there in the Rocky Mountains now. A few had even taken to harassing Forrest directly in hopes that he would give up his secrets to them. In fact, on one particularly notable occasion in 2018, a man named Robert Miller actually broke into the Fenn family home in Santa Fe as he believed the instructions in the infamous poem had directed him to go there and get more information. Once that happened, the police were quickly called and he was arrested at the scene before any damage could be done. But the incident was traumatic for Forrest's daughter nonetheless, as she had been there at the time, and it made Forrest begin to truly question for the first time if he was doing the right thing by allowing the search to continue. That said, even in light of this troubling scene, he ultimately refused to call it off because he believed the treasure hunt was doing more good than harm, as it was giving a lot of people direction in their lives. Instead then, he just further emphasized where the chest was or wasn't, with him clarifying that it both hadn't been hidden in a mine and had been placed in its ultimate location by an 80-year-old man, so it was relatively easy to access at the end of the day. With this in mind then, he said people looking in high-risk areas should stop doing so as there was no need for anyone else to die. All that mattered was that someone who was determined enough to find it eventually would, and that they do so in a safe and legitimate way. Forrest didn't necessarily think that would occur in his lifetime. No, by the end of the 2010s, he predicted the hunt might still go on for decades, but while that turned out to be untrue, there was still time for at least one more tragedy to arise out of the situation, as on March 21st, 2020, the body of 53-year-old Michael Wayne Sexton was found in the Denver wilderness alongside a companion named Steve Inlow, who himself later recovered in the hospital. What made this one hurt even worse was that the pair of treasure hunters had almost died a month earlier while searching near the Dinosaur National Monument along the Utah-Colorado border. But even after surviving that incident by the skin of their teeth, their obsession compelled them to keep going. And so when they got caught out in the cold without the proper clothing or food rations this time around, there was little hope of getting out alive again. Obviously, it should go without saying that following this fifth death, Public sentiment soured on Forrest Fenn even more, as by now many were calling on his decision to continue encouraging others to put their lives at risk highly irresponsible at best. And it wasn't just the multiple bodies that were creating problems for him either now, as on top of that, people searching for the Fenn treasure had also committed a variety of crimes in the Rocky Mountains area. Crimes which included damaging cultural artifacts and defacing the land of Yellowstone National Park in their never-ending quest for glory. So thankfully, the search finally came to an end just a few months later on June 6, 2020. It was on that date Forrest published a blog post telling the world that after all this time, someone had found the Fenn treasure. What he wouldn't do, however, was tell the public the identity of the mystery man. As he himself put it, quote, "The guy who found it does not want his name mentioned. He's from back east." Perhaps unsurprisingly then, that led to much speculation within the treasure hunting community that no chest had actually been discovered at all, and this was merely Forrest Fenn's way of trying to bring the whole thing to a close before more people could get hurt. Some people actually took legal action against him as they felt all their years of searching had been wasted on a chase which had no official end. Some even now came to suspect there never had been a treasure at all. In the words of one hunter named Seth Wallach, in fact, he said, quote, "I think his announcement is at least a few years and a few lives too late, but he has to live with that. I believe this was over much earlier than today." That said, throughout it all, the man behind the treasure hunt maintained his stance that even if he wasn't going to publicly reveal the lucky person's name, he had indeed received photographic confirmation they'd found his chest after all these years. And if there was still any doubt as to whether or not he was telling the truth, all this was ultimately removed when, in December of that year, Jack Stoff, a medical student from Michigan, came forward as the figure who'd solved the decades-long mystery. Why was he choosing to do so now? Well, in his words, quote, "The U.S. District Court for New Mexico has ruled that Forrest's estate must provide some of my personal information to a woman I do not know and with whom I have never communicated, who has brought a meritless lawsuit against me. This would make my name a matter of public record, so I choose to come forward today." Of course, Jack still wouldn't reveal how he'd solved the riddle and where the precise location of the treasure was because he didn't want it to turn into the site of a pilgrimage. As he put it himself, quote, "If I were to reveal where the treasure was, the natural wonder of the place that Forrest held so dear will be destroyed by people seeking treasure they hoped I dropped on my way out." Wherever the hiding spot was, it clearly held a special place in the heart of the Michigan native. So with him not willing to go any further into that, the only question left was what he was going to do with the riches valued at approximately $1.3 million hidden within. As far as he was concerned, that was simple. He had a lot of student debt to pay off, and this presented him with the perfect opportunity to do so. Unfortunately, though, Forrest Fenn wouldn't live long enough to see Jack make this decision, as only 3 months before that, in September, he passed away at the age of 90. Still, at least he got to see the search for his missing treasure come to an end before he died. After all, this had never been about money or recognition for him. No, it was all about giving people something to dream about, and give one lucky person in particular a chance to change their life forever. It's no coincidence that the chest was hidden in the aftermath of a financial crisis. As he said himself during a prior interview with ABC News, quote, "We were going into a recession and lots of people losing their jobs. Despair was written all over the headlines, and I just wanted to give some people hope. But the hope Forrest Fenn gave must also be balanced with the fatalities which were caused by his choices. And that's something that will always remain a part of his legacy going forward, for better or for worse. It's true that at least one life was changed forever, and many others found a purpose they hadn't been able to find elsewhere. But when at least 5 people died during the search for the Fenn treasure, the question must be asked, at the end of the day, was it all worth it? Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.